Welcome into Bracket Buster Breakdown. On this episode, we will be previewing the Big 12 tournament. It gets kicked off on Tuesday afternoon. We got a pretty decent tournament to look at here. There's a lot of good teams. I think there's a lot of potential champions here in this Big 12. I think there's a chance we may even see the national champion come out of this conference. And this tournament, it's shaping up to be a very, very good tournament. So let's get straight into it. So this is your Big 12 tournament bracket. We have 2 games on Tuesday, followed by 4 games on Wednesday and Thursday. Friday, we get down to the semifinals, and the championship game will be on Saturday. So we're going to start off with the Tuesday games, the first round games. The first one tipping off at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is UCF, the debutantes in this tournament, taking on the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Now, both teams haven't had exceptional seasons. Oklahoma State has had a far worse season. I believe they currently sit at 12-19. Compared to UCF, who, they're 16-14. They're a little bit over 500, but they did have a key win against Kansas at home. That was at the beginning of their Pac-12 time. That was their second conference game. But really, this whole conference season has just been a mix. It's been a lot more losses than wins. But the one time that these two did play, it was in Stillwater. It was UCF walking away with a 77-71 victory. It was basically, I believe, right around, half. Oklahoma State was leading, but UCF went on a 12-2 run to go into the second half, and that just kind of went from there, and UCF just kind of dominated that game. So I'm not saying I expect the completely same thing here in Kansas City, but I do expect UCF to advance to the next round. So we move on to the second game. It's a old Big East battle, kind of. It is Cincinnati going up against West Virginia. West Virginia is it's been an awful year, 9-22, with, Coach Bob Huggins getting fired preseason. This just hasn't been a season. Cincinnati, they had a really hot start to the season. Going into conference play, they were 11-2, I should say. They won their first conference game against BYU on the road to go to 12-2, and it's kind of really been downhill since then. They finished 7-11 in conference. These two teams have met twice this year, splitting the series with the home team winning both times. West Virginia won 69-65 back at the end of January in Morgansville. But more recently, as in on Saturday, West Virginia and Cincinnati once again faced off, this time in Cincinnati. Cincinnati ran away with this game, a 92-56 victory. And I'm kind of expecting more of the same in this one. And I expect Cincinnati to kind of handle business and get a victory here over West Virginia, as West Virginia quickly goes into coaching search mode, even though they've kind of been in it all season. So we move on to Wednesday. First game of the day is Oklahoma and TCU in the 8-9 game. This is going to be a very interesting game. TCU, they come into this at the 8 seed. They're 20-11. It kind of feels like they're on the bubble right now, on the wrong side of it, I should say. They finished 9-9 in conference, so they finished right at 500. They have a few good wins. They beat Houston at home. They beat Baylor on the road. But, they do have a few of those, not so great losses mixed in. And really, in the Big 12, there's no terrible losses, but the loss at home against UCF back on Saturday, that doesn't look great. They lost to Cincinnati in overtime back in January. But they started the season off before coming into conference play. They were 11-2. So, but if you look at the teams they've played, the only two teams in the Ken Pom rankings that were above even 100, it was Clemson and Nevada, and they lost both those games. So I know there's been a lot of talk about the manipulation there, but TCU I still think is a strong team. And Oklahoma, on the other side of things, I think is a really interesting situation because there's a chance that Porter Moser may already be on the outs. The rumors coming out today that it might just be a done deal that he's going to DePaul. I don't know if I really put much stock into it, but I mean, this Oklahoma team, they were rolling at the beginning of the year going into conference play. They were 12-1. The one loss was a 81-69 loss to North Carolina. That game was in Charlotte, I believe, so it wasn't a home or road game. But then in conference play, it hasn't worked out this year for Porter Moser and these Sooners. They finished 8-10 in conference, and here they sit in the 8-9 game. This is going to be a very close game, a knockdown, drag-out brawl. But just on the off chance that this DePaul story is true, I went with TCU here because, I mean, we've seen it happen before. Coaches have other jobs already lined up, and they just kind of zone out on the season, and they're just ready for it to be over. So I'm going to take TCU here. I think it's hard to tell. These two teams, they only faced off once this year, and it was on January 10th. So, I mean, that was 3 months ago now. And it was TCU walking away with an 80-71 victory. I kind of expect TCU to get a victory here again. I don't know if it would be by that big of a margin. Moving on to the second game of the day, it will be BYU against whoever wins the UCF Oklahoma State game, which I have UCF obviously, so I will go with that prediction. BYU has had a very good season this year. Mark Pope, I mean, the question was, how would this team transition from the West Coast Conference to the Big 12? That's obviously a huge step up in competition, and they've handled it pretty well, finishing 22-9 overall this season, 10-8 in conference. I think there's a good chance that BYU can go on a run here, which it's why I have them advancing. I have them beating UCF or Oklahoma State. Whoever it ends up being, I think they win either of them. BYU, they have the makings of a team that could go on a run. Moving on, we move on to, I believe, the 7-10 game, and that is Kansas State against Texas. This has been a mightily disappointing season for Texas and for Kansas State. Obviously, Kansas State lost a lot of players to the portal. But, I mean, this team was in the Elite Eight last year. It was kind of expected that they'd keep it up a bit, and they haven't, obviously. Texas, I think it's just an overall disappointment. It's more, I think, coaching on that end than it is players. I really don't know. I mean, Rodney Terry, it's his second season in the job. It's hard to tell with this team. I think Texas is better than what their record shows, but I don't know if they're like at that level to make a run here. I still think they end up getting the victory here against Kansas State, but yeah, it's tough. This one's tough because both teams are both the underachievers of the Big 12 this year. I expect Texas to be the better of the two, and I expect them to get the win here. Moving on to Kansas, they will be taking on, obviously, the winner of Cincinnati and West Virginia. I expect Cincinnati to get the victory here. Kansas, They're dealing with injuries. Hunter Dickinson, Kevin McClure Jr., both are going to be out this whole Big 12 tournament. I don't think that's going to matter for this game, at least. For this game, I don't think it matters. I think they kind of easily-ish win here. Obviously, this is the earliest that Kansas has ever played in the Big 12 tournament. They'll be starting on Wednesday, which I'm sure not a lot of people are thrilled by in the Jayhawk Nation, but I expect them to quickly move on to the quarterfinals here. And as we also move on to the quarterfinals here, we have the number 1 seed entering the mix. It is the Houston Cougars, who have had an outstanding season. They are the number 1 team in the nation. They're the number 1 team in KenPom. Coming into this, they have the nation's 3rd longest active winning streak. I mean, they've only suffered 3 losses this year. All 3 were on the road, and it was to Iowa State, TCU, and Kansas. This team is just on a mad run right now. The teams that they've rolled through in this run is just insane. Now, of course, they are going up against a team they lost to. Now, that could be something there. I think it was more because it was on the road than it was the team. But I expect this dominant run to continue for Houston. I expect them to advance to their first Big 12 semifinals in their first year in the Big 12. Moving on, we move on to the 4th seed Texas Tech Red Raiders. They end up finishing 22-9 this year. They went 11-7 in conference, and they're going up against, obviously, this BYU team that I picked to advance here. Texas Tech got the victory earlier this year at home, 85-78 against BYU. It was on January 20th, I believe. And you know, it is kind of hard to compare because with conferences obviously getting bigger, there's no true round robins anymore except for the Big East, really, in power conferences at least. So you don't see teams going home and away. You can't get a gauge of what teams are better than not. So I personally, I think BYU playing the day before and Texas Tech being on some rest, I think that hurts Texas Tech, and BYU continues to advance here. I think they advance to the semifinals. Also in their first year in the Big 12, I think in the semifinals we will have a all new Big 12 semifinal here with these two. Moving on, we have the number 2 seed, the Iowa State Cyclones, who finished 24-7 this year, 13-5 in conference. They'd be going up against the winner of the Texas-Kansas State game. I obviously have Texas advancing, but factor here is if Kansas State does win, these two just played on Saturday in Manhattan. It was Kansas State walking away with a 65-58 victory, but I don't think that Kansas State's going to get past Texas in this one, so I don't think that number really matters, and I don't think the number would have mattered anyways. I still expect Iowa State to advance here. I think what TJ Otzelberger has been doing with this team these past few years has been just great to watch. I think both teams are going to be really good here. I think that would have a potential of being a game of the tournament type game, but I expect Iowa State to advance there. And then finally, we get to the number 3 seed. That is the Baylor Bears. They are going up against, obviously, the winner of the Kansas game. I have Kansas advancing. Oh, this game, very, very interesting. Because if it is Baylor, Kansas, these two teams just faced off a week ago. Kansas went to Waco to take on Baylor. It was Baylor walking away with an 82-74 victory. They played in Allen Fieldhouse at the beginning of February. Kansas walked away with a 64-61 victory there, so they split the season. But I think Baylor right now, I think they're getting to a point where they can be a team that goes on a run nationally, not just in the Big 12. I think that they have a chance of going far in the NCAA tournament. They just seem very well put together right now. I mean, Scott Drew has done some great coaching jobs. This is up there. I have Baylor advancing here. I think our final four of the Big 12 is going to be Houston, BYU, Iowa State, and Baylor. And from here, I think we have some very intriguing games. We have Houston and BYU in the first one. I think it was a good run for BYU, but it is Houston that ends up advancing. I don't see anybody stopping them up to this point. And then the Iowa State-Baylor game, that is also a very, very interesting game because both teams, man, I think both teams are really good in the Big 12 this year. This is a tough game to pick because they faced off in February. It was Baylor walking away with a 70-68 victory at home. And it's tough because I think on a neutral site, these teams are about even, and that's where this obviously going to be. I'm going to give Baylor the slight edge, and I think they just get over that edge and get the victory here. And then we move on to this Big 12 championship game in my prediction, and it is Houston going up against Baylor. This game just, it oozes just great basketball. These two teams played at the end of February 24th. It was Houston walking away with an 82-76 victory in overtime. That was in Waco too, so that is a huge, huge thing there. Both teams are very, very good. Looking back at that game, Baylor, they came back. They grabbed victory from the jaws of defeat, I should say, just to get it to overtime. Obviously, they lost the game, but that was more because in the most overtime, Houston went on an 11-1 run for the most of the game, that 5-minute overtime. So this game, if we get to this point and it is Houston-Baylor, I think that's the best case scenario for the Big 12, showing off why they're the best conference in college basketball right now, because those two will put on a show. I'd expect overtime just like we last saw. But this time, I think it would be Baylor getting the advantage here. I just think Baylor has just that extra step, I guess I would say, that gets them over the hump here and gets them a victory in the Big 12. I think they end up winning the Big 12, obviously, and they move on as an automatic qualifier to the NCAA tournament. So obviously, they'll make the tournament no matter what. But that is my Big 12 prediction. I think this is shaping up to be a great tournament for the Big 12. And it is just going to be a great, great watch for just the casual basketball fan. So that is going to wrap it up for this Big 12 tournament preview of Bracket Buster Breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you just stumbled across this video, click like, click subscribe, tell anybody you know about it. We're previewing all the Power 6 tournaments, so make sure you stay tuned into that. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon for another episode of Bracket Buster Breakdown.